welcome to another interesting episode of the Working in Tech podcast. Today, we have the honor of speaking with um, Arit, who's more popularly known as Arit the developer on Twitter and everywhere else. She's a software engineer at PayPal who transitioned to tech from a non technical background. I think one of the most mind blowing parts of your story for me is that, typically when you hear like the stereotypical, software engineer story, somebody wearing a hoodie who's 19 and hacking away and things like that. But this was a mid career switch for you. And I think that's what makes it super interesting. I definitely want to deep dive into that. But again, one of the things that Rit does in a day-to-day at PayPal is that she's helping to drive the adoptions of the company's financial products. And she's super active in the tech community, supporting a lot of people to make that transition journey into tech. And I think especially, for Black women and mothers also, because that's something that deeply resonates with her. Arit, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Joan. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad we could make it happen. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Great, let's go. Okay, so I usually like to start this off at the very beginning. So, what inspired this journey for you? Why tech? Because I know you've been in the social workspace before. Why did you make that switch over?
Yeah, so not social work, particularly, more public health.
Public health,
They
yes.
are related, they work together, yes, but they are distinct. Um, so I wouldn't say I chose tech. I would say
Say
oh, I think I was echoing. Was that me?
no, I think it might have been on my part,
Okay,
but
that's all
please
right.
go
Okay.
on.
I would say that tech chose me in some ways.
Yeah.
I sort of stumbled into the industry. So prior to getting into tech, I was primarily a homemaker. For a number of years, my son and then my daughter came along, right? And while I was keeping home and really focusing on raising my children, I had a side hustle, still do actually technically, called the Brace Agency, and that came out of my interest in WordPress. I used to dabble in WordPress all the way back in college. And back in college, it was just like a blogging platform, but it had, grown into
Grown
the
into the
content management system. And so I was using WordPress to, my sister had, a little thing she was doing on the side. So I created like a website for her. So that's how it started, me just helping people get on the internet. But sort of like the reputation grew. And then I started getting calls from, absolute strangers asking me, hey, I saw you did this for your cousin. Can you do this for me? So I had that side hustle while a homemaker of my kids, with my kids. Um, and then I was getting more and more clients, and the requirements became more and more complex. And there was this particular client that was asking for functionality that I couldn't stitch together using WordPress. And that was when it first occurred to me that, oh, okay, there's a language called PHP, and that's the back end of WordPress. And maybe if I knew how to code in this language, I could build what this client needs. So that was like the first idea of even learning to code that came to my mind. Yes. And so I dabbled on the internet. At this time, I was pregnant with my daughter. And so I was on the internet looking up different tiny, courses, YouTube, Coursera, Udacity was another one. Yes. And I started taking random courses. And then I think coupled with pregnancy and that whole experience, I felt like I wasn't really making progress. I was sort of going in circles. So that was when I looked up coding boot camps and joined a boot camp, completed it. Like literally, that's how I got into tech. And then after I completed the boot camp, I had a choice. Do I go back to my agency or do I try and find a job? And that was when I discovered that, oh, okay, software engineers are paid really well. And I was like, oh, it would be nice to be making this money. And so I decided to go the career route as opposed to going back to my agency. And the rest is history, as they say. Yeah.
Wow. That is such an interesting journey. I think one of the most hilarious pieces of advice is when I hear people, and again, I get what he's coming from,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, don't go into tech for money. No, go into tech for money because
Listen.
it's such a big motivator. Of course, I think it helps when you have passion,
Right.
but I think your story captures that in a big way. Were there other motivations for you aside, that desire to learn and solve that problem for that customer?
I mean, that was what motivated me to even like consider learning how to code. I think when I started boot camp, that was when, I mean, just the, oh my gosh, I remember like just the payoff of like coding, like writing in this language that I've never been exposed to before, and then seeing the functionality come to life on the front end. Like, I think I still get that rush today. I still, like,
Mm.
trust me, 5 years in, I still get that rush of, wow, I built something and it's working. I configured something and it's working and it's, satisfying all the use cases. Like, I still get that rush today. So that was definitely what kept me going with bootcamp. But at the same time, I would be demoralized because I felt like my degree is in biology. Okay. So my
Mhm.
degrees are biology and chemistry. So I don't have a computer science background. And so a lot of the concepts would confuse me and I would feel like, what am I doing? And that was where my bootcamp mentor, Jeremy, shout out Jeremy, that was where my bootcamp mentor really made all the difference because he would say, you're doing amazing, you're making good progress, you're not where you started. And he would always remind me of how far I had come, particularly when during boot camp I felt like this thing is not clicking, I'm not getting it. Like, especially I learned Ruby Rails, that was my boot camp focus. And particularly when the models became more complex and it wasn't a simple CRUD app anymore. And I would literally like have anxiety attacks like, what
Mhm.
am I doing? Let me go back to the rivers and the streams that I'm used to. Jeremy definitely came through for me in just helping me believe that I could do it. Yes. So that was a huge factor that kept me going. I think if I didn't have that, I probably would have talked myself out of continuing and actually pursuing this as a career. Yeah.
Wow. Something that I don't think that it's said enough, and I think I mentioned that in our chat earlier, is how important it is to put things in perspective for people switching into tech.
Yes.
There's two paradigms, and I think understanding both helps, anyone who's making that switch. It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult,
Yes.
but it's also worth it. In fact,
Yes.
I think it's more worth it than it's difficult. But
Yes.
of course, I understand that those two alone cannot necessarily sustain you
Yes.
to be successful. And that's where like support systems,
Yes.
come in. So shout out to Jeremy, but
Yes.
were there other things also
Yes.
that kind of like helped you maintain a positive and healthy perspective to keep trudging on along in that journey?
Honestly, I had no clue. Like when I look at where I am today, if you had asked me back then if I envisioned where I am, I would have said no. I think in that moment, I had the support, I had the hunger, and I was making progress. Like I wasn't, when I would get stuck, I wouldn't be stuck forever. Like I
Mm.
would be stuck for maybe a week or maybe two, right? But then I would practice, I would go over material over and over again. I would watch different, like I didn't just stick to the bootcamp material. I would also supplement with YouTube and other resources. Because sometimes if you hear something explained in a different way, then it clicks, right? Yes. So I didn't only depend on the bootcamp material. I would go into Stack Overflow. I would go into just other platforms that had lessons on the same, like for example, recursion. It took me the longest time to wrap my mind around concepts like recursion. And so I think internally, and then again, I'm a recovering overachiever. So I think that also played a factor and that's from my upbringing. Like it's hard for me to admit defeat. It's
Mm.
easier for me to like not attempt something and just be like, okay, that isn't for me. But once I get into something, it's
It's
very
over.
difficult for me. So I think that aspect of my personality also played a factor. Yes.
The-
Um,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So I'm just trying to think of other things. I don't know. I think that's it. Like the mentor, like my tendency not to give up easily, and the payoff. Listen to me. That payoff. Look, you code something, and then you interact, on the front end, and it's work. Like that payoff was like vitamin to my body. It was like, I don't want to say drugs, but it wasn't like it was just like, wow, like I did that. So I would remember that and say, okay, I can also learn this new module or this new lesson. Yeah. So I think that definitely helped. Yeah.
You touched on three powerful things that I really want to highlight, just because, again, there's a lot of gems in there, but I want to pull these three out. So I like the three things that you touch on because I think those are three important ingredients for anyone to succeed. So you talk about, having a support system
Yes.
that will get you through the hard days. You
Yes.
talk about hunger. For
Yes.
you to succeed in this thing, you have to really want
You
it.
have to want it. Yes.
And I think another thing that you touch on is that learning ability, right?
Yes.
Of because I think that's something that a lot of people don't give credit for. Personally, like one of the best advice I see given is like almost starting tech from like almost like that tech support role. And
Mhm,
why it's important is like you can learn basically from the basement. Now, if
mhm,
you don't want to go that route, it's fine.
mhm.
But what you have to do is that you have to do a lot of reverse learning. And what do I mean by that? It's you going in and figuring out, okay, I've watched this lesson and they've touched on five different concepts that sound good, but don't stop there. Watch like a 5 minute video, a 10-minute video on just that one concept. Because by the time you've done that all through, you now have a well-rounded understanding of that context versus like just watching that 15 or 20-minute lesson and just taking all those terms and thinking you know it when you've not really
Yes.
dug
You
deep
don't.
into what they mean.
Juwon, you just touched on something that I tell my mentees all the time. And when they watch this, they're going to recognize exactly what I'm about to say. There's a difference between knowledge and competence. And I
Mm,
think a lot of times we confuse the two, particularly when we're first learning. We mistake knowledge for competence, and they are two very different things, but one does lead to the other. Knowledge does lead to competence, but they are two different things. And I think, unfortunately, and I'll say this with my full chest, unfortunately, I think the structure of many of the boot camps that we have today do not actually allow students to really absorb what they're learning. Now I get it. At the end of the day, you're making money as a boot camp, right? So bodies in and out the door is the way to do that. You probably cannot, it's one or the other. Either you take a cohort for an entire year and you charge them like a ridiculous amount of money, or you get 4 cohorts through the door
mm,
in 1 year and then you can charge them less. So I get the economics of it. My statement is not judgmental, but the reality is a lot of boot camps are not structured to allow students to marinate in the content and actually absorb it. It's almost like, oh, let me just, take it one time so I can move to the next module, and then take it one time so I
mm,
can move to the next module. And so if that is your situation, no worries. Just know that after you finish boot camp, you may have to go through it again, right?
mm,
And I think it's important to state that having to go over something over and over again is not an indication of failure. You're just absorbing. You are absorbing on deeper levels, and you are building not just a knowledge base, but you are developing a competence around those concepts or around that material. Okay.
mm.
So do not judge yourself if you don't grasp something at first exposure. Very little people do. For many of us, it takes 2, 3, sometimes 4 rounds of exposure for a new concept to finally start sticking. Yes.
Hmm. That is that is so mind blowing. That is so mind blowing. And I think another interesting perspective too, actually, that come to mind is number one. There was a book I read recently that's called Think Again by Adam Grant.
Mhm.
And one of the key principles he talks about, I can't remember the name of the concept specifically now, but it's almost like this, almost like knowledge paradox, where
Mhm.
one of the times that we're most unyielding to knowledge is actually when we've just learned something newly. We're
Yes.
so protective of that new knowledge that we're not willing to actually let it go and
Yes.
let it increase.
Yes.
I
Yes.
remember something, and when I was listening to that audiobook, I remember something that David Fowler tweeted. I think it must have been like a couple of years now. He said something like, when he got into Microsoft and they asked him about how good it was at C sharp, he said it was a 7/10. Now, after becoming is it a distinguished engineer, it feels more like a 4.
Wow.
So oftentimes, even being comfortable, and I like what you said, marinating in that knowledge,
Yes.
getting deep, turning over and over again, it doesn't mean that you're failing.
Yes.
You are learning new things
Learning.
every single day by looking
Right.
at the same material. I
Right.
mean, I think the most practical example is like, how many times have you read something, right? Maybe a caption or a tweet, and you miss something, and then you went back and like, oh, I'm sorry, I got worked up over nothing because I missed that important thing. If
Yes.
something as a tweet can be that, you know, inconspicuous sometimes,
Right.
imagine learning an entire discipline,
Right.
especially one that's basically potentially going to transform your life.
Your life. Exactly.
So I definitely agree. And I think the second one would be that there are people who go to college, 4-year degrees for this stuff, and still don't come out the strongest engineers. Most of them won't, right? Because they're learning the basics.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to give yourself grace if you're going to,
Yes.
especially a lot of this 45-day boot camps for 6 figures.
Mine was 6 months. Okay, my
Yeah.
camp was 6 months long, full time, I might add. So
Wow.
6 months full time. I think it was 9 to 12 months for the part time options. Yes.
Wow.
So yeah.
And which is why, like, I'm on Instagram, I see this 45-day, 6-figure things. I'm like, I don't know about that.
They'll meet us outside. I mean, they'll meet us out here when they are done with the 45 days.
Yes. So I think so it's great that we're diving deep into this learning piece, but I think one of the big challenges also, one of the big areas of interest that I've seen a lot of viewers really zoning on is getting that first opportunity, landing that
Mm.
first job. Because even that in itself is almost as much as a journey as it is like just learning the concepts. What was
Yeah.
that journey like for you?
Okay, so I'll preface this by saying that for me, this was in 2018. I started my search for my first developer job in August of 2018. And this was pre-pandemic, okay, and a different economy. Okay, so I have to preface my story with that because I don't want anyone to necessarily apply word for word what I'm going to share with this because we all know that this current economy is crazy. Okay, okay. So to date, I think the most traumatizing part of my journey was the job search.
Wow.
To date, and that's considering my almost 5-year career now. To date, the most traumatizing part was the job search for many reasons. First of all, I had no clue what to expect. Even though my bootcamp had career prep consisted of just them assigning us different algorithms for us to practice, right? And then giving us pointers on how to create our resume and our LinkedIn profile and all of that. So they did their best, okay? But I wouldn't say that it particularly prepared me, and maybe nothing could have prepared me, okay? Now, getting out there, rejection. Oh my gosh. I applied to over 100 jobs. So let me give you the stats. I applied to over 100 jobs. And people might think that's a low number, and you are right if you think that's a low number. But let me explain why. Because I only applied to jobs where Ruby on Rails was the first item in their stack. And so I filtered out a lot of opportunities because that was the only thing I knew. All I knew was Ruby Rails. I didn't even know JavaScript. We had one module on JavaScript in my bootcamp, and I did not digest that module. I just inhaled it and exhaled it in order to pass the quiz at the end, and that was it. So I didn't retain any JavaScript knowledge. The only thing I knew was Ruby Rails. So that was a strong filter in terms of the jobs I went for. So maybe if I didn't have that filter, I may have applied to 2 or even 300, okay? But I stuck with, it was 100 plus. I think I stopped counting after 100. It was 100 plus. Out of 100 plus jobs, I reached final round in 3. And then I got the offer in 1. And even the way I got the offer was this part of the story, right? So rejection, oh my gosh. Like, you know, being ghosted, being rejected. I think about 2/3 of my application, I didn't get a response. So about 1/3 of my applications, I actually got to do the first round and maybe subsequent rounds. Over 2/3 of them, I never got a response. And that can be so challenging because in boot camp, they keep telling you every day, you're the ish, you're the ish, you're the ish, you know? So you come from this environment where everyone's like cheering you on and you're passing your quizzes and you're building all these apps and everyone is making you feel like, oh, you're going to be the next hot cake in software engineering. And then you come out here and nobody wants to talk to you. You know, nobody like so I know for me, what were my thoughts? I'm too old because at the time I was 37. I'm too old. I'm too fat because this was pre-pandemic, right? So even the interviews that I got first round, I'm going into office, right? This was pre-pandemic. We didn't have this, you know, Zoom call, everything on Zoom like we have today. And so these were the insecurities that would always come up in my mind. I'm too old. I'm too fat. I'm Black. You know, I'm a woman. Like these were the insecurities that would always, you know, imagine going into interviews and the entire panel are white males. And so, and then of course, the number one insecurity was, I don't know shit. You know, like, forget about this boot camp I completed. I just really don't know anything. Oh my gosh, like those days, you know, I would cry. I would lean on my mentor. You know, we had a community of like alumni from the boot camp, so I would lean on them. But oh my gosh, sometimes I just wanted, let me tell you why I didn't quit. One reason, and I'll tell you, the one reason why I didn't quit was because I needed a job to pay back the loan that I took to pay for boot camp. If that boot camp had been free, I may have given up the job search.
Wow.
Like much earlier than I did. But I had taken out a $6,000 loan at 9-point-something% interest. And throughout boot camp, I was only paying interest. And I had a 3-month grace period after boot camp before I now needed to start paying the full payment. So in my mind, I was like, Arit, you don't have a place. No matter how you feel about this, you can't get a job because you know you don't have this money to pay back this loan. I'm being very frank, like I'm being very honest. And so that was the hardest part. That was the hardest part for me, was just the constant rejection. There was one interview, I wouldn't say the company, but there was one interview that they literally laughed me out of the room.
Wow.
They literally just started making sport of me. Like, this woman thinks she can work in this industry. Like, and I'm even not, I won't say I'm ashamed, but now me, like, I wish back then I had the courage to walk out, but I didn't even have the courage to walk out.
Because you just thought it was normal, but it wasn't.
Normal. I thought this is how it is. And I internalized everything. Like, of course they would laugh at me. What was I thinking? Like, these are people with like masters and maybe even PhDs in computer science. Like, what was I thinking going to boot camp for 6 months and thinking that I could land? So these were the kind of thoughts that would like assail me like on a regular basis. And so after, so August, September, October, there was one job that I came so close to getting, Juon. Like it was December of that year, right? So I did the coding challenge, I did the behavioral. So now I had the on-site, and I went, the on-site was 3 hours long, and I felt I had a great, like everything was going. They told me at the end that like it's between you and one other person. I was feeling very happy. It was for look, I didn't even care about pay. As long as the money was enough for me to pay back that loan, I wasn't even thinking about like six figures. I wasn't thinking of anything like that. And it was December of 2018. And those who remember, there was a government shutdown that month. And the role that I interviewed for was attached to federal funding.
Wow.
And so when the shutdown happened, they called and they were like, sorry, we are not going to have the money that we would have paid you. And they actually told me, like, you were going to be our choice. Like, we were going to give you the job. But because of the shutdown, there is no money.
You must have felt like the world was against you.
I was so depressed. That was December. And I was like, you know what? Let me go back to my agency. I was like, at least with my agency, I was making 500 there, 450 there, 600 there, like at least with my agency, I was seeing a little, because I was just like, this is crazy. But then the following month, January, one of the jobs I interviewed back in August, one of the very first jobs I interviewed, they rejected me. And the reason they gave me was because I am brand new to the industry. They didn't have the bandwidth to mentor me and like, help me train, because they were in a high growth phase of the company, right? And so, that was in the beginning of my experience. So it didn't really pain me like that. So fast forward to January, and the recruiter for the company, apparently they had been through that high growth phase, and they were more settled, and they were looking to bring in some less experienced engineers. And she remembered me from August. And so, yes, so she called me and she was like, if you're still available, we just have one more conversation we want to have with you, and then we'll decide if you get the job. And that was how I got my first job.
Wow.
Yes, that was how I got my first job. Yeah.
And wow, there's so much to unpack there. I think one of the ones that jump at me really quickly, I think one is a comment and then one is a question. So it's leading a boot camp to, or a training program as we called it. I've seen like also the impact of giving newbies a chance, right? And I think, first of all, many companies are not even positioned to do that. I think one of the best programs I've seen, there's this JP Morgan ETSA program. It's called the Emerging Technology Software Engineer, something like that. But it's one of the few programs I've seen that's, in fact, they've done it so much that they separated off their college track away from this track. So this is just only self-taught and boot camp.
Oh, okay.
And even the method of intake is completely like mind-blowing, right? So they bring them in, do a hackathon. They don't even focus too much on the technical skills. It's just more focused towards like your ability to solve problems. And once you pass that, you're in a 2-year fellowship. And after that fellowship, you'll become a full software engineer in there. And the pay is really good too. I wish more companies, work in that same way, where like you're giving a lot of new people the chance, because you can't have that expectation. I think one of the positives is that, of course, it builds character.
Right.
But then again, there's a lot of talented people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talented people that get kind of like lost by the wayside, which is really sad.
It is.
I think the question in that piece is, you mentioned like the limitations of your job search being tied to Ruby.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, because this is something that I've heard like both sides. Is it important to choose, or how important is the choice of the technology that you're learning as a new software engineer? Because this will definitely have some impact in the back end, which is the job process. So
yes,
can you tell me a bit more about that?
I think it's important if your goal is to find a job. Okay. So if your goal is to work for yourself and, source clients, source customers, then you can do whatever you want. Because at the end of the day, chances are the customers you source are not going to be technical, and all they care about is the end result. They don't really care how you do it, right? So in that case, you can learn whatever you wish and use that to build your business. But if you want to work in the industry, it makes sense to choose a stack that is well represented in that industry. Okay. So, for example, front end frameworks, I think React is king, right? Much love to all the other frameworks. I think Vue.js is like a close second. Much love to the Vue.js community. But I think we can confidently say that React has cornered like that, that part of the market. And so by choosing React, you set yourself up to have more potential opportunities. Now, if at the end of the day you don't like, people are just from different walks of life, Juan. You have people that for the next 5 years, their money, okay? However, they have who is supporting them. They don't really need a job now. And you might then have the luxury to dip and dabble in whatever you choose and take 3 years to find your first job because you don't really have any pressure, So we do need to keep in mind that people's backgrounds and people's privileges, there's that word. People's privilege is different. People's privilege profile is different, right? So you have to be real with yourself and you have to be true to your own background. And so, if your goal is to land a position as soon as you can and have the highest number of potential opportunities available to you, it makes sense to learn what is common in the market. Okay. And you can learn what that is by just looking at different job descriptions, look locally, look globally, remotely, like just do your research and figure out, okay, what percentage of job descriptions out there are calling for this particular stack. It might be a good idea to go ahead and learn that just to give yourself the chance. But nobody can tell you what to do. Okay. If you don't, you know what you want at the end of the day. Just know that whatever you choose, the consequences of your choices are going to be what they are. Yeah.
I see that you've dropped a lot of Nigerian innuendos in in this chat, and I'm loving it. Especially the part where you talked about like you being stubborn about whenever you choose a pathway.
Yes.
It reminds me of the Nigerian motto for this year.
Yeah. No grief for anybody. It's just a part of my personality. It's, I've been that way since I was a child. Like, I'm very competitive. I'm that, like, even with my kids, other parents will say, because my kids are soccer players,
Nice.
Yes, they are members of a local club here and all of that.
Wow, that's
and so,
amazing.
other kids will say, and other parents will tell their kids, have fun, I'm telling you, I say, better win.
Because winning is fun.
Like, I'm that mother telling you better score goals. I just don't want you to play. I need 2 goals from you. I need 1 from you.
That is so amazing. So, in terms of like the skills needed to succeed as a software engineer across different technology stacks and things like that, what are the 3 that you believe are the most important based on your experience?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. The 3 that I think are top, apart from just raw technical skill, right, which is important. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's so true. Communication. Okay. Now, what do I mean by communication? Communication is more than just the words coming out of your mouth or the words you're writing or typing on a screen. Communication that is effective carries a certain level of emotional intelligence. You need to build the skill to read the room and read energy so that you can leverage those readings to, like collaborate effectively with people, right? And so, for example, things like humility. If you don't know something, don't pretend you know it, right? not jumping to conclusions. If something doesn't make sense to you, ask clarifying questions. It will shock you how these things might seem so obvious, but they can really make or break your success as an engineer. Um, you know, communicate in such a way that, or learn to communicate so that you don't necessarily blame people, you blame systems. Have a system oriented approach to working with people, as opposed to like, oh, this person made a mistake. Well, they may have made a mistake, but what about the system, or what about the structure maybe made that easier to happen, right? And it's these, like, that's what I've discovered in my career, right? Is these abilities that by the time it comes down to technical skill and everyone's on the same level, what now do you use to set yourself apart? It's not going to be more technical skill. There will always be somebody that's better than you at coding or anything in tech, right? There will, like, just in terms of just technical ability, there will always be someone that's better than you. So I think having a holistic perspective of yourself as a candidate will get you further than, it's almost like building up one arm and the muscles are so big and then your other arm is looking like spaghetti. Like it might be so impressive if we just look at your one arm, but then if we look at your body as a whole, you look like a monster, right? So I would say, like, top definitely is communication. I would say the second thing, I mean, it's related to communication, but it's not exactly the same thing. But like being able to function in a team. Okay. Not every boot camp, not every training program out there gives its students ample opportunity to learn as a team, right? To build something as a team. Not every training program does that. It's one of the reasons why I love open source. I don't always have trust me, I haven't like actively participated in open source in a while, and it's just because of the way things are for me right now. But in my heart, oh no, open source is king, because open source to me, if you're not working a professional role, open source can be the closest approximation to an actual working environment, like an actual professional environment. And so knowing how to collaborate with people, again, it goes back to communication, right? Knowing how to give and receive feedback, knowing how to give and receive criticism, right? Knowing how to close communication loops, right? Which is important when you're working with like a team of people. And then I would say the third thing, and this might be more related to software engineering in particular, but I would say the third thing is prioritize concepts over syntax. That's something that, particularly with the people that I mentor, I see that in like more newbies, is that they're so fixated on syntax. Like we get so fixated on being able to code, like type the thing out. And I don't think we always spend as much time on understanding the concepts and the principles behind what you're going to eventually code, right? I think sometimes we think that we're going to be rewarded for the lines of code that we type or the lines of code that we produce, but you're actually rewarded for the product of your thought process, right? In my current job, like I code maybe 45% of the time, 45 to 55% of the time. The rest of the time is planning, ideation, figuring out what is necessary for a project. And I'm doing this with other engineers, of course, not by myself. It's about writing documentation, updating documentation, clarifying requirements and priorities from product or other stakeholders. Like that's like a very big part of my job. It's not like just coding for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so I think developing that ability to think and to process concepts, and even if you don't know how to code it, you should be able to figure out what needs to be done. I think that's the skill that moves people forward, because if you only focus on syntax and getting it out in the code editor, then you run the risk of becoming an implementer, not an engineer. And they are two different things. Okay? Engineering is different from implementing. And I think a lot of quote unquote developers are actually implementers. Like, okay, when it comes time to write it, okay, I'll write it. But engineering happens up here, not in the code editor, right? Engineering happens up here. Yes.
It's interesting that you say that because in one of my roles, we were working with a vendor and we had them on site. And when we were during our conversation, they said something that was super important. It said that they've been able to build better products since they started building their team to be product engineers instead of software engineers. I'm like, what do you mean by that? It's like, I don't want to explain a feature to you and you go build it.
Yes.
I want us to first have a conversation
Yes.
about what this solution is, what the problem is, what the
Yes.
customers are having. So even though I don't have you in this customer interviews, I don't have you in this thing, I want to get you as close to that as possible, because oftentimes, if you really understand what my problem is, the
Yes.
solution you might even come up with might be much better than what I'm prescribing.
Right.
So I want this to be a collaborative process as much as possible. And that speaks it specifically to what you're saying, because that's how you solve problems of, oh, now that we've built this thing out, now it doesn't work with this other thing. And now we have to take this out and rebuild this and do that. Whereas if we were maybe a bit more thoughtful in the beginning, we would have actually come up with a better solution.
Right, absolutely.
But it's interesting that you also say communication, because I've heard it so many times and it sounds cliche, but I'll probably share some personal journey that I'm on that has blown my mind. So I think you mentioned two separate elements. So on the one side, you have communication for the part that most people don't think about. We talk all the time, but we don't listen.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yes.
So it's like, first of all, the ability to listen actively.
Yes.
But even the ability to pick up on things that people are not saying.
Yes.
In product management, one of the things that I see every single time that's blown my mind is there's a lot of pain points that customers will never express to you. They'll never say it.
And it's not because they don't want to. They may not even be aware, or they may not have
exists
a level of awareness where they are able to articulate it, right? Yes.
Yep. So oftentimes you have to solve, even if you solve that one that they're expressing, if you don't solve that underlying problem, it almost becomes impossible to really give your customer the most value.
Yes.
And I think that's very key. So the ability to do that. But even for the one that we do all the time, there's effective speaking and there's ineffective speaking.
Yes.
There's a way that you can make a really valid point that people are going to absolutely reject it. You know, people will say things like, I'm only responsible for what I say, but I'm not responsible for how you hear it. It's absolute rubbish.
Yes.
You're responsible, because if you think about it, why are you saying something that's going to get rejected? You're better off keeping quiet. Like, if this person says no to what you're asking, then have you succeeded? So effective communication is the ability to even make someone agree with you, even for something that they don't really agree with. And that often comes from, so a lot of the things that I found in that space is like, don't start from you, start from them. Yes. And I think it's the same thing with listening too. Oftentimes, even though someone doesn't necessarily want to go with what you're saying, so maybe they don't like this new technology that you're offering, or they don't want to do it the way you want to do it. If you first of all set that precedent, most cases is like, okay, what are we trying to achieve? Before we get into this philosophical or romantic argument about, oh, Ruby is better than JavaScript or whatever else, can we decide what we want to do first?
Right.
Because if we work backwards from there and say, oh, this is what's, so we say we want the cleanest, fastest technology we can build. And then we go say, okay, out of all the technologies we know, which one is the cleanest? And then we say, oh, you know what, buy a country mile because this technology is the newest, it's the cleanest. Okay, great. Which scales better?
Right.
Which does not take up so much space? Right. I think if we start working back, you will see that person actually concede and say, okay, I'm stuck on this because this is what I'm most comfortable coding with.
Exactly.
But if you're willing to do a lot of the heavy lifting and willing to show me the ropes, then maybe I can actually work. Because oftentimes they're not disagreeing with you because you're wrong.
Yes.
They're disagreeing with you maybe sometimes because they're insecure.
Right.
Or they'll feel less competent if they
Or
go
they
to
just
that
want to
path.
stay in their comfort zone, which is a human thing, right?
Exactly.
It's a human
So
nature thing. Yes.
so it's more important that you feel make them feel comfortable than it
Yes.
is that you're right.
Yes. And it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to get to that point and take yourself, so to speak, out of the equation and center other people, right? It
And
doesn't come natural. Yeah, it's something
yes.
you need to build. Yeah.
And one of the beauty of even what we're discussing is like, so oftentimes we're doing this because we're trying to convince somebody else. But I think even the biggest one about this communication strategy, because a lot, it can be manipulative if you're just trying to figure out what people want and use them. No,
Yes. No.
the beautiful part of it is that even in this journey, you also learn to change your mind.
Right.
Because now instead of holding a position, you're also on this discovery journey with this other person where you can also be the one who changes.
Right. You
And
move from rigidity to flexibility,
yeah,
which is a beautiful thing.
a thousand
Right.
percent, a
Yes.
thousand percent. Yeah. So, how important? Okay, I think we have about 15 minutes left because I just really enjoyed this session. So I don't want to forget our audience. So, audience, people in the audience, please, I hope you've been enjoying this. Show Arit some love in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. You don't want to keep all this goodness to yourself. Um, you can start dropping comments about any questions specifically you have for Arit about a career journey, about software engineering, whether things that you're stuck with, whether it's resume, career, LinkedIn. I'm sure she'll be able to share some interesting perspective on that. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for those questions, so I really enjoyed the journey of you getting that first role. How instrumental was that in your journey in terms of now unlocking all the other opportunities you were able to land?
Extremely, extremely, extremely. I can't be more grateful for my first role. I really can't. Because I didn't know anything. I knew nothing, right? So this was an opportunity to work in like a production environment, a mission critical environment, right?
Mhm.
Where it wasn't just my little projects anymore that, if they broke, or who cares, now. And so I worked for Capterra, Capterra.com. A lot of people know that website. It's where you can go and compare software for literally every category under the the skies. And that is a website that is trafficked by tens of millions of people every single month. And so, I mean, you can just imagine the pressure, but my team was amazing.
Mhm.
My team was amazing. I was mentored, I was coached, I was supported. I was exposed gradually to more critical parts of the stack. My tasks started out small, and then they grew in complexity and in relevance to what we were doing. I mean, it was an amazing. I was there for a year, and it was just an amazing time of growth. I learned about like using Git and GitHub and workflows, and I learned about all the different teams that go into maintaining an amazing application: product people, data people, designers, UX UI engineers. Oh my gosh, like database people. Like we're all like working together, right? So just being exposed, I couldn't have hoped for a better first job. Okay. That first job was so instrumental for my growth. I learned about, a code design, right? System design. I learned about maintainability, scalability. I learned to code with the app in mind and not just
Mhm.
my little section. These are things that, if you like, do boot camp for 2 years, you may never get that appreciation, right, until you're in that environment where that becomes necessary. I learned how to receive criticism. Oh my gosh. When I create a PR and I think, this PR is going to, and then all the change this, change that. This doesn't make sense. This is crap. This I was so humbled on that job. I was so I was so humbled, but it was an amazing experience. It really was. I wouldn't have left that. Let me tell you the reason why I left that job. I left that job because the job I left to was 100% remote. And
Mm,
yes, that was the only reason. That was the only reason I left. Like, if not that that job was 100%, I would have stayed with Capterra, because it was just such an awesome place. But I couldn't pass up. I could because as a mother, and at the time my daughter was, still a toddler and all of that. So I couldn't pass up because my commute to that job was 1 hour one way, sometimes more
wow.
than yeah. So at that time, it was 2019. At that time, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to work from home. But yeah, it was an amazing job. It was.
Yeah, that's wow, that's amazing. So, and then how was the transition into the new role and the one after that?
Yes, the new role, that was a remote role. Oh my gosh, I loved my time at Forum. That's the name of the company. Forum was where I grew, not only in coding ability, but I grew in leadership. I grew in ownership. You know, at Capterra, I would just work on tasks. Okay, it was when I got to Forum that I started taking on more. I started taking on, a group of tasks, or I started taking on a whole epic, right? And so my leadership skills and my ownership skills grew in Forum, where I wasn't waiting to be spoon fed what I'm going to do from a senior engineer. Now I had to step up to the plate and, just assume more ownership over what we were building, right? Show the initiative to, gather, information that would inform our requirements as opposed to just waiting to be told what to do, right? So I spent 2 years at Forum, 2.5 years at Forum. And like I said, I grew exponentially. At Forum, I was promoted from junior engineer to mid-level. So that was my first promotion. And it was just an amazing, amazing team. Oh my gosh, amazing team. Async first. That was when I really got to experience like a truly remote first company, which was very empowering. My communication skills went sky high because I had to, because we were async first. And so we downplayed meetings and we upplayed like async communication methods. So I had to level up in that. Absolutely. So it was an amazing experience. And then I was let go from that job because of the economy. Okay. It
Mm.
was like a mass, yes, it was like a mass layoff. And so I was let go. And I mean, we can have another session about that. Ooh. Oh my gosh, that was an experience in of itself. But I was let go from that. And so I was back on the job market. And through my network, shout out to Nikima Prophet. Shout out to Nakima because she connected me with the opportunity at PayPal.
Mm.
Um, and so just through network connections and I found myself at PayPal. I was aiming for a promotion to senior at Forum, but I was let go before I could make that happen. And
Mm.
so I had a choice when I was looking for my now current role. I had a choice whether to just stick, to mid-level roles or if I should apply for, because ambitious me, I decided to. I, I
And once you set your sights,
I decided to target senior roles. I was like, it's fine. But yes, had a wonderful interview experience with PayPal. I mean, just met so many wonderful. I still work with them till today. Shout out to Brian. Brian was the engineer that gave me my coding challenge in React, and I didn't know React at that time.
mm.
But the coding challenge was in React. But he was so gracious, so kind, and he's currently my team lead. So we work together
Mm.
every day.
Wow.
Yes. So that's nice. Yeah. So
And that's I think that goes back to the awesome thing I was talking about, like giving people a chance. It's like oftentimes like you don't set people up for failure just because, right? Like and I understand like it's challenging. You never know, like, everybody's trying to maybe hire top of the line talent. But I think if you're willing to shift your parameters a little bit, you will find like even amazing, amazing people.
yes.
But yeah, that's amazing. So I think okay, first question we have is from Trey.
Yes.
Is asking, how do you approach presenting technical topics to non-technical people?
Technical people. That's an amazing answer. Answer. It's an amazing question. Hopefully, I can give an amazing answer. Um, the way I approach it is I put on my empathy hat, And I really try as much as I can to put myself in that person's shoes. Okay. And you need to take your ego and put it aside. Because there's something about ego and like being technical. Okay. You need to put that to the side. Okay. Because the goal is not to show how technical you are, the goal is communication. Actually, the goal is understanding which communication effective communication supports. So I would say put yourself in their shoes and then think of everyday, accessible, approachable examples that can showcase those technical topics, right? So just because a topic is technical doesn't mean you need to use a technical
Terms.
approach or technical terms to describe that technical topic, right? And so just think about accessibility, think about relatability, presenting material that is approachable and non-intimidating. And that will draw your audience in. That makes your audience to trust you because they can trust you not to, you're not purposefully talking over their heads. And people can sense it when that's what you're looking to do. At the end of the day, there's only so much that you can break a technical thing down. And so also knowing your audience as well, right? And so if your audience is non-technical, you probably don't want to take the most technical thing out there to present to them, right? So you want to have a little bit of you just want to have a little bit of awareness around that. Yes. But put yourself in their shoes and then go from there. Yeah.
Okay, before we go to the next question, there were some shout outs earlier in the show that I did want to call out. Joy sent a lot of hearts. We're sending it right back to you, Joy. And then Afro Ela said, my empress, I did loyalo. Okay.
Ifo, thank you, Ifo. My day one. Thank you.
So, before we actually go to that next question, I had a question of my own. You talked about that networking piece.
Yes.
And that's something that gets talked about over and
All
over
the
and over
time.
and over and over.
Yes.
Is there, number one, very quickly, how important is it? I think you've already touched on how important it's been for you, but what's also the right way to do it?
Okay, I'll answer quickly. How important? It's very important. Okay. And I'll tell you why. Because there's an aspect of human nature that is more comfortable with the devil it knows. Okay, yes. And so at the end of the day, when somebody feels familiar and comfortable with you, you may not be the best at what they're looking for, but because of that comfort and familiarity, they're going to go with you. Okay, so that's one of the main reasons why networking is so important. Okay, then in terms of the right way to do it, I think that the best time to build and nurture a network is when you don't need it. Yes. Okay. That's the best time because by the time you need a network, we can feel it. Like when somebody reaches out to me and they are reaching out because they want to connect, they want to, pay me a compliment on something they heard me say or do, or they watched me in some session, or, they just want to find out general information. I can tell when someone is connecting just to connect and when they're connecting because they need a job.
They need something like it springs forward. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, and people don't like to feel used. That's the truth.
No.
Yes. So the best time to build your network is when you don't need it. And there are many ways to do that. There'll always be people in your network that you're closer to, you have more of a rapport with. Maybe you catch up with them more often than others. But it's a good idea to keep. I have like a spreadsheet, a Google sheet of all my network contacts. And every so often, maybe twice a year or 3 times a year or twice a year, I send out an email just summarizing what I'm doing, I catch them up with my professional life, right? And that's one of the ways that I keep the people in my network, up to date with what's happening to me so that they know, right? And many of them will email back and say, oh, I love these twice a year updates from you, Arit, keep doing what you're doing, and then if I do happen to need them, it's not like I haven't communicated with them in 5 years, they have heard from me. Yes. right?
Wow, that is such a great hack. It reminds me of investor updates as a startup founder.
Yes. But that's exactly what it is, right? So you don't feel the pressure of having to check up on every single, just do like a mass, and
That's amazing. So another question from
yes.
okay, again we'll go to the shout out. So Margaret says always beautiful listening
Margaret,
to
good to see
Arit.
you. Thank you.
And then Chukudi also sends a lot of hearts.
David. These are my
Okay,
these are my mentees from my community.
nice.
Yes.
That's
Thank you.
amazing. That's amazing. Thanks for coming through, guys. So Rian asks, first of all, thanks for all the advice, Arit. And then how can one build communication skills if it's an area of weakness?
That's a good question. I would say the very first thing that you need to overcome is your fear of looking or sounding stupid. You just have to, because you're going to sound stupid. You are, to some people, right? You're going to sound like you don't know what you're saying. You're going to sound like you're doing uh uh mm, mm, but you get better at communicating by communicating. There's just no way around it, right?
Mm,
And so I think the first thing is you just have to decenter your belief that what somebody thinks of you can actually make a difference in your life. Like, it's a mental thing. Like, you have to get rid, so that when you do quote unquote make mistakes in communicating, the response from people doesn't stop you.
mm,
Okay. People have always asked me, people have, Juan, I do trainings from time to time, and people always ask me one question. They say, Arit, whenever I attend a training that you're doing, I notice that you never use notes. You always seem just to be talking from your mind, or talking, like, I never see you consulting. And I always tell them, I say, what the communication you experience from me now was birthed practically 20 years ago,
mm,
when I used to be, I mean, not that I am not am, but back then I really, really was involved in faith community. And a lot of what I used to do in my church was speak, right? Whether
mm.
it was presenting, whether it was preaching. And when I say preaching, not necessarily on Sunday, but it could be women's meeting, it could be. So I've had a lot of experience talking to crowds. And that was when I used to falter. That was when I used to
Mm.
stammer. Yes, that was when I used to lose my train of thought, right? But I think because it was faith community, you always have the mother saying, "That's all right, that's okay, keep going, girl, we love And so I think that was my time of awkwardness, right?
Mm,
So it's that skill that I'm now using in tech. But I don't want you to
mm,
think that I've always been this way. So it's the same
mm.
advice I give people. You will not get better at communicating until you start communicating. And you will
Wow.
make mistakes. You will fall over yourself. You will hesitate. You will lose your train of thought. You just have to keep going. And eventually, you will start having that mastery over your thoughts and the connection between your mind and your mouth, right?
Wow. 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 That I feel like that's a very, very, very strong way to end it. Again, I think with anything else, whether it's code, communicating, you have to commit to doing it and doing it intentionally.
Yeah.
Again, I think communication is one of those skills where because we do it so often, we seduce ourselves to thinking that we're good at it,
Mm,
whereas we might not be. So it's important that when you practice it, you're intentional.
yes.
And there are a lot of great people like at speaking. If you look on Instagram, you can find like there's a guy I follow, like even how you enunciate your words
Yes.
or how you put emphasis, like so you can how you pause when you
Yes.
say something for effect. There's so many little kinks and gimmicks, but it first of all starts from that realization that maybe this isn't something I'm particularly great at, and I'm just gonna work at becoming, a little better every time.
Yes.
I'll do something consistently,
Yes.
and I'll share again the story of my live stream that I shared with Arit. One of the reasons why I started this, aside from helping people discover tech careers and like listen to amazing people like Arit share their journey, is also because for me, I struggled a little bit with consistency and I wanted to be able to do this weekly. And just doing that habit has made me better at doing it. So if you
Yes.
want to be better at speaking, want to become a better developer, just do
Yes.
it every single
Do
day.
it. Yes. Absolutely.
Um, Again, we're a little over time, and I want to be respectful of your time, Arit. But this is usually the last part of the
Sure.
stream where you either shout out, something, whether it's a training,
Oh, okay.
your LinkedIn, whatever it is that you want to promote, or even just any nice last words that you want to leave with people to kind of like just keep in mind and think about.
Sure, sure, sure. Okay, my website, where you can sort of, get to know me as a professional is arit.dev. So my name.dev. I don't know if there's a place I can type it. I'm sure
Oh
Juwon.
yeah, we're gonna put it in the
Okay, all right.
down in
Yes.
the link below.
Okay, okay. So arit.dev, I will highlight three things. I have a shop, so arit.dev/shop, and that's where you can get my courses. Some are free, some are paid. And I have courses on, fail proofing your tech career when you're getting started, building a job search strategy that actually gets you somewhere, and other courses like that. I also offer coaching. I coach up to my level. Okay. So what that means is I coach from total tech newbie up to, mid-level/early senior, because that's my level. I can't teach what I don't know. Okay. So you can see my coaching services, arit.dev/coaching. And then finally, I have a community, a tech community called the Arit Developer Circle. And you can get more information on that, arit.dev/circle. And that's a community of mostly software engineers, but we do have some product people, we have designers, we have UX UI people, and we basically just help each other level up. It's primarily people who are earlier in their careers, so 3 years or less of experience, and we just help people level up, get better, and also find comfort in community. So
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I think this has been a really great episode
thank
of
you.
Working in Tech live stream. Again, we're back this evening again. Today is a double header.
Okay.
Two amazing Black queens in tech. I think this has been awesome. So I'm sure that's going to be awesome too. Check it out. Big shout out to Arit for coming on to this stream again. Really enjoyed chatting with you. And we'll
Thank
see
you,
you
John.
again soon.
Yes, I had fun. I would love to be back. Yes.
Okay.